Hi everyone and welcome to Lab 2-3, and in this lab we are going to work with some data that has some issues that we have to clean up. So let's hop over to our computer now and open up Excel and start working with this data. Alright, so when you first open up this Lending Club data file, what you'll see on the first tab of the file, and down the bottom you'll notice that there are two tabs in this Excel file. The first tab has the end user license agreement. Now this is proprietary data that was provided by the Lending Club to our textbook publisher, and you are able to access and use this data because you've purchased the textbook, the ebook. All right, so that's the only reason that you're able to use this data. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to use this data. So what is this Lending Club data? Well, the Lending Club it's a peer-to-peer lender. So it's a system set up that allows individuals to loan to one another. And things like interest rates, risk, other terms of the loan, how long the loan is, all these data points are collected by the Lending Club. And so what we have here on the second tab is tons of information on these loans. We have the amounts, we have the length of the loan, and let me just make this a little bigger so it's easier for you to see. So we have ID number, and I guess the Lending Club has removed this data, so we don't know who the lender and the borrower are, and so that's for anonymity. We have the loan amount, we have the funded amount, so I guess this is the requested amount, this is the amount that was actually loaned. We have the term of the loan, 60 months here in this first observation, the interest rate, the monthly installment payments, the rating of the lendee, the person receiving the money, the borrower. What is their credit rating? Are they a good credit risk or no? The employer's title, the length within employment, whether or not they own a home, their annual income, their purpose for the loan. So here we have debt consolidation. That's the purpose of this person's loan. And so we have tons and tons. If you go across the columns, we call these columns variables or attributes. And so we have tons of variables. So think about the structure of our data, right? So across the columns, we have attributes or variables. I like to call it variables. Across the columns, we have variables, and down the rows are what are called observations. The rows are observations, the columns are variables. And so each observation is an individual loan. Each row is an individual loan. And then for that particular loan across the columns, we are measuring different variables. Okay? So just scroll through this information, look at what kinds of data are available here. And so, I mean, this goes all the way out to column EP. Right, so that's we have almost 100 data points or 100 variables for multiple data points here, and so we have lots of. Actually, we can just count how many columns do we have. Let's say we have 146 columns. So you can see it up here. 146 columns. We have 146 different variables measured for each individual loan. And if you go down to the bottom here, we have 235,631 loan observations. So we have a lot of data about borrowing and lending here. All right. So now we have to think about, the structure of this data. So we talked a little bit about that, variables and observations. We also have to think about the format of these numbers. So this column here, this variable is in a number format, but this column here is likely stored in a text variable. This is also, the interest rate is probably in a number format. If we think about the employment length, this is probably a text variable. Issue date, this is probably a date variable. So those are our three main types of variables. We could have a number variable, we could have a date variable, or we could have a text variable. And So I want to think about the structure of the data, how many observations, how many columns, variables. So how many rows, how many columns, how many observations, how many variables, how the data is stored. Is it a text variable? Is it a numeric variable? Is it a date variable? And then I also want you to think about, as you kind of click around and explore this data a little bit, what types of data issues might be present in this data? Because this is real data. This is data that has not yet been cleaned. And so right away, something that I'm seeing is that we're missing information for some of these loans. For example, whatever this variable here is, months since last delinquent, we don't have this data point for every one of our loans. So some loans have information about this variable, other loans do not. And so if we want to use that variable, we have to think carefully about whether or not it makes sense that some have missing numbers here. So maybe they never had a delinquent payment, and that's what the missing value means. So we have to think about what that means and whether or not we need to transform or change that data point so that it makes more sense for our analyses. So explore this a little bit, and then we'll come back and we'll work through the lab. So we're just going to pause here, explore this data, and then we'll come back. All right, so let's close Excel. Let's close out that Lending Club data that we had, and let's open it in a new way. All right, so close out Excel, reopen Excel with a blank workbook, and once you're here, once you have the blank workbook, I want you to go to the data ribbon. So my data ribbon is not showing, and I want to make sure it is available. So I'm just going to pin. If this happens to you, you can just pin the ribbon. So I'm going to say always show ribbon. Okay, so now I have my ribbon. I want to go to the Get Data tab, right? So I'm going to go to Data, and then I'm going to go to Get Data, and then I'm going to say From File. And then I'm going to say From Excel Workbook. And then what you're going to do here is once you click From Excel Workbook, you're going to navigate to where you have this data stored or where you save the file. So I'm going to say From Excel Workbook. It'll bring up a secondary screen here where we're going to locate that data and tell it where to pull it from. So I have it saved here in my LaSalle directory, and so here's my data. I'm going to open this up, and this will just take a moment. And so there's advantages to opening this file in this way, using this Get Data feature, because if you use this Get Data feature, you can do some manipulations very easily. All right. All right, so we don't care about that end user license agreement. So we're going to use the Loan Stats tab here from the file, and we're going to say transform the data. So we're going to click transform data. All right, so now this Power Query editor has popped up, and so this Power Query editor allows us to make changes to the data, to manipulate the data in a very systematic way rather than doing it directly in Excel. So it looks very similar to the way Excel looks, but now we're in the Power Query editor, and what we can do is we can do things like if you click at the column here, you can filter this by different fields. It'll tell you in the column header if this is a variable that is stored by in a number format or in a text format. It'll tell you if the value is stored in a date format. So date is a type of numeric format. And what we want to do here is we want to, there are way more variables in this data set than we need for the purposes of our analyses. So what we want to do is to go through this and to delete, remove anything that is not useful for the analyses that we're performing. All right, so there's going to be maybe about 20 or so variables that we're going to look at. Okay, so the first variable we want here is in column 3, loan amount. So we don't want this variable here, whatever that is. We can remove this field. So we can right click the header and we can say remove. All right, so we'll just delete that column, that variable, that attribute from our data set. We don't need the member ID, so we can right click, click remove. We do want the loan amount. We don't want the funded amount. We can remove that. We can remove this variable. Let's keep the term of the loan, how long it lasts, right? We want the interest rate, that's useful. We don't need the installment information, so we can click that. Let's keep the grade. Let's keep these next two columns. We can just do shift right, so we can delete two columns at the time. The next variable we want here is employment length, so let's remove this. Right, so then we got employment length. We also want home ownership. We want annual income. We don't need verification status. Let's get rid of that. Let's keep the date here in column 16. Let's keep the loan status. Let's keep title is the next variable that we want, so we can delete everything between loan status and title. We'll remove columns. And again, I'm just clicking in the column header. I'm right clicking and saying remove if we don't want the variable. Let's get rid of everything. Let's see. We want zip code. We want this state. We want the DTI. We want the delinquent 2 years. We want the earliest credit line. We want open. We want the next variable we want here is open account. So we can delete these three columns. So we got our open account. We want the revolving balance. We can get rid of this, right? We got the revolving balance. We got the revolving utility and total account. Okay, so now I've got all the variables that I want, and I want everything after column 35 to be gone. So I'm just going to do shift. I'm going to go all the way over to the end of this list of columns, and then I'm going to highlight all of them and right click and remove them. So you can see there's a bunch of data in here. There's so many variables for each of these loans. And this is a very large data set, 200,000 or so observations. So if your computer is running a little slowly, that's to be expected because there's just so much data in this, and it takes a little bit of computing power to work with it. So I am just going all the way over to the right here, and you could do Control Shift and jump right over to the far right, but I wanted you to see just the sheer volume of variables and attributes that are available here in this data. So we're a very rich data set. So I just removed all those columns, and now we have a limited set of variables that we want for our analyses. All right. So now as we look at these, I want you to think about, what are the issues that could come up with this data? What are some things that could be problems for our analyses? Well, one of the things that stands out to me is here, we want to know how long somebody was employed when we give them a loan. Well, we have a mixture here of numbers and text variables. And if we're going to do some type of analysis where we look at employment length, and we want to create a chart, a bar chart that displays average employment length, right? We can't do that if this variable contains letters in it. We can't do a numeric analysis on something that has letters in it. So one of the things that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to reformat this variable. We're going to have to extract the number only from this this variable here. We're going to have to create a new variable extracting only the number. Okay, so we'll see what we have to do with that. What else is an issue here? Same thing here, months. This term variable has the word months in it. We might want to talk about home ownership. So if we want to do some type of analysis on home ownership, maybe we want to recode these variables as 0, 1, and 2. 0 for rent, 1 for mortgage, 2 for own, right? and so that allows us to do some numeric analysis. Same thing with loan status. Maybe we want to create a variable that's like 0, 1, 2. Zip codes. Now we have X's in these zip codes, so we got to think about if we want to do like a geographic analysis, can we use that variable as it is? What else is an issue here in this data set? You know, to the extent we have any observations here, any rows that have missing values, that could be an issue as well. So just think about these questions. So think about, one, which attributes here contain date variables, which contain text variables, which ones contain numeric variables. We want to think about which of the variables are formatted in which ways. And I want you to, within this set of data, what do you think is going to affect a borrower's interest rate that they receive on a loan? So what do you think is going to, do you think the occupation status or home ownership is going to affect the interest rate? Right? So think about that a little bit. And think about, you know, in this data, what do you think is going to cause you some trouble? All right. So given the answers to those questions, the final question is going to be, all right, given what you have here, what can you, what types of questions can you answer using this data? What are some things that you can do, given the attributes you have, given the variables you have, given the observations that you have? What questions can you ask of this data? Because you can't ask every question of this data. This data will not answer every question you have about lending. You have to think about what you have available and what questions you can ask and answer with that, with what you have available. All right, so at this point, what I'd like you to do is to take a screenshot of this screen, and this could be part of your screenshots that you upload to Canvas for this lab. All right, so I'll give you just a minute here to take a screenshot. And once you've taken that screenshot and put it into a Word document or a Google Doc, let's move on to the next part of this lab. All right, so let's start manipulating this data here in the Power Query Editor. All right, so what are we going to do? Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to work with this variable called term. All right, so we want to take out the word months out of this variable. So each loan has a term and it's listed in months. So how can we do that? All right, so let's click on this column, and then up top you're going to go to the Transform tab. Okay. All right, so we clicked on the Transform tab, and here we're going to click Replace Values. So I'm going to say Replace Values, and then a new window will come up, and we want to tell the Power Query Editor what to do. So we're looking for any instance where we have a space followed by the word months. So you can see in this variable here, it's 60 space months, right? So we're looking for space months, and we want to replace it with nothing, right? We want to leave this replaced with blank. So basically what we're telling Power Query to do is to find cases where the word months appears and just delete it, replace it with nothing. Okay, so we're going to click OK. All right, and you can see the Power Query editor here in Excel got rid of the word months in all these observations. Okay, and then we're going to do something similar with employment length. So we're going to again click the column, hit Replace Values, and now we're going to look for the word years. So any case where you see the text string space followed by the word years, and we aren't going to replace it with anything. All right, so we'll just leave that second part replaced with blank. We'll click OK. And now you see we've gotten rid of all the observations that have the word years in it. But we got rid of all the observations with the word years in it, but it didn't quite do everything that we needed it to do. Okay, so you'll see here we still have an observation with the word year in it. Okay, so we didn't get rid of all of it. So the next thing is we're going to say replace values. We want to look for the word year now, so space year. And we don't want to replace it with anything. We want to delete it, so we're going to click OK. Okay, so we got rid of the word year. All right, we're still not quite there yet. We still have pluses here. We have 10 plus. We still have a less than symbol here. So we got to do something similar. We got to get rid of, let's get rid of the less than 1 character, okay? And let's replace less than 1 with a value of 0. Because this is measured in years, let's replace it with 0. We're going to say replace values. We're going to try to find less than 1. So make sure you're matching the way it's written in the cell, so it looks like it's less than space 1. All right, and we want to replace that with a 0. Any instance where there's less than 1, we want to replace it with a 0. And click OK. So that takes care of that. All right. It looks like we still have some NAs here, not available, not applicable. Let's get rid of those. So we're going to say replace values. So we're going to say look for N/A. Replace that with, what should we replace that with? Let's just say 0. All right, to make it consistent. If it's not available, we're going to say 0. Okay. Replace NA with 0. That should take care of the NAs. Okay. And it looks like we're still seeing these plus signs. We haven't dealt with that yet. Now, for this plus sign, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to come over here. We're still in the transform tab, but now we want to do extract. Let's do extract. And we want to do text before the delimiter. Okay. So what this is going to tell Power Query to do is to pull out of any cell the information that appears immediately before the plus sign, and then exclude the plus sign. We're going to say the plus sign is what we call a delimiter. A delimiter is, in data storage, it tells the data storage software where the next cell begins. So we're going to say the plus sign is a delimiter, and we want to keep anything to the left of that delimiter. Okay, so we're going to just type plus. All right, so we're going to say plus. Click OK. All right, so now we got rid of the pluses. That's a good thing. And just to be safe, let's get rid of any spaces that we have in here, because this might screw up the way that this variable is stored. So we're going to say extract the text before the delimiter, and we're going to say the delimiter is a space. Okay, so we're just going to hit space, 1 space. Okay, and the reason we're doing this is we want this to be stored as a numeric variable, and Excel might have trouble reading that numeric variable if there are spaces around the number. So what we're telling Power Query to do is to remove all spaces from around the number. Okay, so we're going to click OK. Okay, so we got that going. All right, so now that we've done all that, we're free now to convert this text variable into a number variable. So I'm going to come again back to the transform tab. I'm going to say data type. Data type is a whole number. Okay. And then we have our new variable, employment length, and it's stored as a number variable. And this will allow us now to do analyses. What was the interest rate based on the length of employment? You know, we could do some analysis where we analyze interest rate by length of employment, and that allows us to come to some conclusions possibly to whatever questions we might have. Is the length of employment associated with the lending rate? You know, that's a question we could ask, and descriptively we could look at that. Let's visually look at the interest rates in different categories of employment length. Less than 1 year, 1 year, maybe less than 5 years. You create different buckets, and then you look at the average interest rate in each bucket and you see if there's any relationship, right? So just a real basic descriptive test that you could do. So at this point, I want to pause for a second, and I want you to, again, take another screenshot of your work here. I want you to pause, take a screenshot of this, and then we'll continue on. So just take a minute. All right, so after you've taken the screenshot, we're going to come back here to the ribbon within the Power Query Editor, and we're done. This data is ready to load up into Excel for us to analyze. So now we can click Close and Load. And what this is telling Excel to do, or telling Power Query to do within Excel, is to close out the editor, and load it up into an Excel file. All right, so let's click Close and Load. Let's lock and load. All right, and this should load up in our data set here. So it's getting data, right? This will take just a moment. This is a large data set, so it could take a few moments to load up. Over here you see the status, right? So it's saying 40,000 or so rows have loaded so far. There's approximately 200,000 rows in here, so this will take just a moment. All right, so after you've given it some time, you should now see something like this in your Excel window. This is the data that has been loaded. It's formatted as a table, which is useful to us because we can do some useful manipulations when we work with data in a table format. And what I mean by table format is, you can see the colors here. It's all formatted in green and shades of green. And then we have these filters applied to the column headers. And so having the data formatted in this way, for example, will allow us to create new variables very easily. So we can say, if we wanted to say, what is the interest rate multiplied by the loan amount, this would tell you, I guess, the annual cash interest expense. And so you do it once, and then the table automatically completes by itself. And so that's the power of formatting data in Excel in a table format. If you're working with an Excel file and it's not in this format, one thing that you could easily do to make sure it's formatted in this way is you could just click Control T. Control T will format the table, or format the data into a table format. All right, so I guess the next thing I want you to do in this lab, and it's to answer these lab questions. So the lab is asking you how many records or rows appear in your data set. So you're going to click Control down, and this will take you to the last row of the data file. It looks like you have 235,631 rows. The first two rows relate to headers. So really you have about 235, not about, you have exactly 235,629 rows, or you should have. And then the second question here is, how many variables or attributes do you have? And if you scroll up to the top, we can count those as well. So you go from column A all the way out to column S. And if you just highlight those, you have 19 columns. You can see that up here in the name box. You have 19 columns in this data set. Those are your two lab questions. And then the questions that you have after this are more of thought-provoking questions. So why do you think it's important to remove text values from your data? What would happen if we didn't? What issues did you run into as you were following along in this lab? And then what are some steps you could take to clean the data and resolve difficulties that you identify? All right, so now the final step in this lab is just take a screenshot of this Excel file. All right, so you've now prepped this data. Take a screenshot of the data, save this file to a new file name. So save this, example is you could call it, you could name it Lab 2-3 Lending Club Transform. So you can name it that. Just make sure you name it something different than the name you gave to the original data set. That's my only word of caution. All right. So it's always good practice. If you make changes to a data set, save it as a new version of the file. That's best practice. All right. Well, this concludes Lab 2-3. I appreciate you watching. Hopefully you learned a little bit about Power Query here in Excel, and I'll talk to you real soon. Take care.